Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Construx webinar series. I am Mark Griffin, the host of the Construx Inspect and Adapt podcast, and your host today for this morning's webinar entitled Waterfall versus Agile 2023, featuring Construx technical service provider Earl Beede. Today, Earl is going to share his insights into 2 decades of waterfall versus agile arguments. Anyway, Earl, you're going to tell us a little bit about some of the differences between the obvious and the marketing hype and things like that. But, this reminds me kind of Pee Wee Herman knocking over the bikes. I mean, you're even wearing the bow tie. Are you
Well,
trying to rekindle? Are you trying to rekindle an old bar fight here, or what's going on?
yeah. Well, it is bow tie Tuesday, so I had to wear the bow tie. But yeah, in little ways, because one of the things that always frustrated us at the beginning at Constructs was that when Agile was first coming out, it was dealing itself against a straw man waterfall. Maybe it was the most common waterfall. Maybe it was, what normal people would see, but it wasn't how it was supposed to be. And what we've seen in 20 years of Agile is we're not seeing Agile as it's supposed to be either. So let's really look at what's going on here and what is the true difference after 20 years of Agile, how it's actually being practiced in the real world versus what they were thinking it was going to be when it first started, and where waterfall, again, they were thinking was being first started versus what it really turned into.
Evolutionary versus revolutionary versus reality, something like
Well,
that. Yeah.
it's everyone wants to say mine is good and yours sucks. So what really is the core difference here? And I think there is a core difference here, but it's a subtle one. And a lot of people I don't think understand that. And so hopefully in this webinar, we'll give them a new way to look at both of these practices and start saying, hey, how can we up our game, whether we're doing waterfall or agile?
Well, that's a great tease, and I'm looking forward to this for sure. I thought I'd do a couple of mechanical things here off the bat, a couple of housekeeping items, if you will. Yes, this is being recorded, so if you have to multitask or if you have to step out or something like that, feel comfortable that this is going to be available to you shortly. We're planning to have it up on our YouTube channel very soon. If you don't already, you might want to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we continue to just dump a bunch of helpful software development insights for you to use to improve your practices up there all the time. Also, you can ask questions anytime during the presentation using the Q&A function in the Teams window toolbar. Earl tells me he has some time at the end for a full Q&A, so if you have any technical difficulties whatsoever, you can send it to us via the chat, and we'll try and help and resolve any issues that we might run across. So, by way of intro, for those who don't know Earl, Earl is a CSDP and senior fellow here at Construx. He has more than 25 years' experience as a manager, as a systems analyst, as a QA representative, a process architect, and ultimately a consultant here. He's designed and implemented improved software practices for companies in industries like telecom, computer hardware and software, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, oil and gas, retail, many, many others. And here at Construx, Earl also designs and leads seminars and provides consulting services on agile methods, early project lifecycle practices, estimation, requirements, QA, contract management, and just general software methodologies. And as a bit of a trivia, he used to raise chickens in his spare time.
Yeah.
So, all right,
Yeah.
my
Now they're
buddy.
just old chickens. They don't have to be raised anymore. They're just
All right,
old chickens now.
their future dinner, perhaps, but maybe we won't go into
No, not stringy old chickens. All right.
that. All right, illuminate us, my friend.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark. And my welcome here. I'm Earl. Just a reminder of today's tech. Mark mentioned a few things. One, the Q&A button you should see at the top of your bar. That's how we'll be answering questions throughout it for the end. So if you want your questions queued up, if you have a technical problem, Mark will be looking at the chat and try to respond to a few things. There's also some feedback there, so if you feel like giving me some feedback along the way, certainly could do that. And yes, the talk is being recorded. We'll hopefully get it up on YouTube pretty soon. All right. So what am I thinking about today, right? I call these series that I do thinking about things. And what am I thinking about today? Well, I'm obviously thinking about, this is the thing I want to know. We got to sort of separate what do we mean by waterfall and agile just a little bit. Because too often people, when they've used these terms in the past, have thought about waterfall and agile as something that is not really what it was intended to be. So we're going to give a brief definition, and then we'll get into the meat of this, right? How does Waterfall and Agile stack up? But we're going to actually have to take in a third factor, not just Waterfall and Agile, but actually how the people coming to Waterfall and Agile can really react to it. So we have to look at some skills distribution there, and then we'll just take those skills and apply them against each method, and then we'll wrap it up. So that's my agenda for today. So let's get into it. So the first thing I wanted to be thinking about waterfall is what really do people mean by waterfall? And so when people say the word waterfall, I think they picture this in their head, right? This idea of these clear phases that cascade down typically like a waterfall or a cascade. You have some serious phases on requirements and design and detailed design. And finally, you get down to the coding, debugging, and the system test at the end. Perfectly understandable. The first papers that came out had this kind of drawing in them, and people mostly focus on these arrows going down here, right? They say, oh yeah, it flows down. They sometimes forget there's arrows going back up, but there are. So, there is some potential for feedback here. But this is not what usually people do when they're doing waterfall. If you actually go out and see people doing well-run waterfall, they're often not doing this one. Maybe they're doing something like this. They're doing this thing called stage delivery, where, yeah, you have the requirements analysis and design up front, then you go into stages. And often these stages would be a quarter long or so, 3 months, maybe half a year, sometimes down to a month. But basically, stage we design and we release it, and we start seeing what's really going on, and we incorporate that information back into our requirements analysis design and go for the next stage, right? So sometimes this is what it meant. This was actually a very common way. If you actually saw waterfall, people were doing something usually more like this. Or even they took it for another spin and said, you know what, we actually have a budget constraint or a time constraint. And so we had to add the concept of going in priority order, right? Get the highest priority stuff done first, then the second priority, and the third priority, and so on. And he still had the strong upfront kind of thing. But this is what a lot of people did. They said, okay, we've got a work to schedule or work to budget. And when we get that final schedule budget out, then we will say, there we go. And everything else we just didn't have time for. This is often what people would do with the waterfall. And even as waterfall evolved, we even saw something more like this, where we would do some serious requirements and design up front. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit like feature-driven development. And we come down and say, okay, we understand that when we develop a vision, get some feedback from the client, and keep iterating it and some of our evolution prototyping until we finally get to release. Now, we're at the edge of maybe what you would really want to comfortably call waterfall. But really, when we think about waterfall, I want you to be thinking about all these different possibilities. We've given them lots of kinds of names over the end. Some are very good names, maybe some bad. A sequential, well, everything is in some sort of sequence. We do something first and something second, so it's not a great name. Plan-driven, still not a great name, because hopefully we are doing some level of planning for everything. So we'll just continue to call it waterfall for now. But there's something here that's unique to waterfall that hopefully I'll bring out here in a moment that separates it from agile. So when you think waterfall, I want you to be thinking about various flavors of how we actually do some sort of phases, but we can still have a lot of incremental development during the overall work. But for agile, well, if you think about agile, I think there's only been one very common approach to agile that's sort of dominated, and that's some sort of variation of something Scrummy-like, right? What we have here, when people say agile, usually they have a backlog of work, a queue of work, and how that queue is created really varies all over the place. Often it's just a collection of orders or items that people have identified over time that they want added to the back, that want the team done. And then the team then takes that, and hopefully it's ordered and somehow, and there's some refinement going on, hopefully. But then the team takes that work and they do all the work in these sprints or increments of work until we run out of time and value. It really is a time and ordered kind of approach that says we really need, I have this idea of a fixed time overall to help us do this. And if we really want to do more things, then there might be some things out of scope. So this is what I think what most people say when they say the word agile. They mean some sort of queue of work and then lots of executions against that queue of work over time. Now, there is one other variation of agile that I sometimes see, and that is doing something that people say they're doing Kanban. Now, I have to admit, when I go into organizations and they say they're doing Kanban and I look at the Kanban, what I see is mostly just this board here, right? This board, in fact, it doesn't have the work in process limits. right? So there's no limits here. There's no policies between stages. And what I actually see most of the time when I see this board is that they're not actually doing Kanban as a set of tools and techniques to help maximize flow. What they've gone is given Waterfall a veneer of Agile. What they have is their phases across the top, their different resource pools across the top. First it goes here, then it goes to this resource pool, this resource pool, and they just track it on the board. Now, is that a helpful thing? Sure, I think that's great. And maybe if they're controlling for the size of the work and the queue in the front, that's an added positive as well. But it's really not Kanban. And so it's often just a, hey, how do we do a smaller batch, more flowing idea of waterfall? So I don't put a lot of stock when people say we're doing Kanban. What I see is that they don't like the idea of going back and saying, this kind of work here really requires a team to do well. We don't really want to fund a team. We don't want to be a team, and so we'll do Kanban instead. That's what I normally see. So that's what I mean here by waterfall. That's what I mean here a little bit by agile. So it's time now to start saying, okay, given those two ideas, that waterfall is that variation of we got some stuff up front and then we go some sort of typically increment of development, and agile says we don't do a lot of stuff up front, then we go to lots of increments of development. Let's actually then start comparing the two. What is different after 20 years that we've seen over and over again that really differentiates waterfall from agile? And you've seen a list like this before, right? That waterfall is really document heavy, and agile is what you want to do if you want to be lean and mean and innovative. And if you have some chaotic, not well understood areas, that agile is way better for this. And when waterfall is carefully detailed out and command and control, while agile is very adaptive to what's going on. You've probably seen a lot of this kind of stuff trying to say, why is waterfall and agile different? And frankly, I'm going to be honest with you. I think most of this is just BS. It just has nothing to do with the methods themselves. It has far more to do with the culture that they're working in, not the methods. When you actually look at well-run waterfall projects, and very few people have actually had the privilege of being on them, luckily I have, but you look at it, you have this culture. You could be very innovative. In fact, I think sometimes waterfall has a capacity to be even more innovative. I'll argue that more here in a second. But I also think that it's about how you get along as a team. You could be very team-oriented, very collaborative, very empowered in a waterfall project as you can an agile project. Now, I'm going to give agile some credit here. They brought that to the forefront. That was never a really well-stated assumption in our waterfall days back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. We just assumed you had a good culture. We didn't spell out. And the agile, I'll give them credit to say, you know what? Fix the culture and a lot of the development problems go away. Yeah, we'll have a few things about development, but we have a lot of things about how you organize and arrange yourselves, which has nothing to do really with the methodologies themselves. Now, can a methodology like waterfall be abused until you got these very rigid roles? Sure, but so can agile. And so all these differences, I really don't think, after 20 years of practice, really explain the difference between the two. Because our agile processes seem to be falling into the same kind of bad corporate and organizational structures that our waterfall did, and are suffering similar consequences. They're not delivering the kinds of things that people really want. So what makes them different? I think there is one critical thing that if you start looking at this, one variable really talks about the difference. And I think that one variable here is, where do you iterate and learn? Let me say it again. Where do you iterate and learn? That means both waterfall and agile have places where you iterate and learn. And when you iterate, you have to iterate for both the developers. We're kind of familiar with that, right? How should this design? Does it really work? How does it respond to things? We need to iterate and learn about that. But the stakeholders have to iterate and learn. Stakeholders often show up with a preconceived notion of what the solution is. And generally, our stakeholders are not good designers. They don't know the technology. They only know what they know. The classic is the better buggy whip kind of thing. They only want something that's sort of a derivative of what they already know, whereas true technologists, true innovators think of new possibilities to solve the problem. So stakeholders have to iterate and learn too. They haven't thought through the problem. They haven't thought through what really they want to do, and so something has to help them iterate and learn as well. Both waterfall and agile have places where they've designed where you're going to iterate and learn. It's just in different places. I think that's the big difference that we see after 20 years of practice. If you're doing these two things well, you're going to see different places where you iterate and learn. So where does Waterfall iterate and learn? Waterfall likes to iterate and learn in the requirements and in design. That's where it wants to iterate and learn. It wants to spend most of its time in iterate and learn. Now, if you looked at a poorly run waterfall project, you would see that maybe, you're only spending 10% of your time up here, that you're not spending a great big deal of time. And so there's not really much iterating and learning going on. But if you're on a well-run project, you can easily see, 60% of your overall development time spent there iterating and learning, figuring out. I love one project I was working on that was a well-run waterfall. They said, on thinking days our brains were sharp and good, we did requirements and design. That's where we did all our hard thinking. On our days that our brains were dull and were just kind of glugging, we coded. Why? Because the code was just a sort of translation of what we already discovered and figured out in the requirements and design. Now, a lot of you probably have never experienced that. So what does it kind of look like? I need to spend a moment maybe giving you painting a picture a little bit of what this kind of looks like. What does it look like if you're iterating requirements and design? Well, usually you have these kind of 4 players involved. You have some analysts, some BAs, something like that are analysts that are doing a bunch of work, and they're using models. We iterate and design via models. And the models we use, the common ones I like to use, the 5 context diagrams, use cases, etc. Those are the ones I like to use as an analyst. They help me understand exactly what kind of problem is going on. But the developers are also using models as well. They're using sequence models, class models, state charts, and potentially some other models as well to really help them understand the design and how they're going to build it. And there is a ton of interaction and incremental development. We iterate to learn. The BAs are iterating with the stakeholders about what is the problem. And they tend to do this in small batches when they're doing this well. Tell me about one use case. Tell me about one course in a use case. Help me understand how that actually works. And they surface rules and business rules. I remember as a modeler, one of the things that drove me nuts is doing the modeling was actually fairly straightforward to me. But then I present these rules about how the system would work or how their problem is understood. And the business people, these stakeholders would go, wow, we hadn't thought about that. You would hear that a lot as a modeler. We didn't know about that. We got to figure out what to do. And then they would spend a month and a half trying to figure out what they're going to do. So there's plenty of iteration going on there. The analysts will also start iterating with the developers who are very quickly coming up behind them, saying, okay, now that I see this one thing that needs to be built, let's start modeling it out in our world so we can figure out how we're going to build it. And they talk back and forth. Well, here's options, and maybe that person has to go back to the stakeholders because the possible isn't really, the preferred may not be possible at that point. And the BAs also are interacting in requirements and design with the testers. The testers are writing test cases and developing complex scenarios and start saying, okay, well, here's an option. And they might think of a boundary case that the BA haven't thought about, and they would have to interact there and go back and forth. And then the BA goes back and forth to the customers again to get clarity when there needs to be clarity. And of course, the testers can start interacting with the design, saying, okay, show me in your design how it's going to solve for this test case. Show me in your design how it's going to handle this scenario. And then there's some back and forth there and some incremental development as well. And even the developers can maybe even go off to the customer and say, you know what? We heard what you wanted, but given our budget and time, how much can we constantly build? And there might be some interaction there, though I usually would probably try to route that through the BAs more than the devs going directly. But hey, I think that could work too. And it could be that some of the customers, the stakeholders, the SMEs or customers actually become some of the testers at a certain level. Then we got a full set of interactions going on. So when you're doing waterfall, this is all happening in requirements and design, not during coding and development. Waterfall, on the other hand, wants to do its iterating and learning in working software via creating code. We create code, we release the software that the generator created, and then boom, we get people to use it and give us feedback. We get both iteration learning for the working people, the developers, about how the design is doing because we're constantly iterating on the design and trying to make it work and pass the test. And we start educating the stakeholders because they're using the software to try to do their job, whether in real life or in some sort of environment that gives them the sense of real life. So we do both here. We iterate and learn in working software. And this is the one I think most of you are probably already familiar with, so I don't need to explain this much more. So we got two ways to iterate. We iterate and learn either in requirements design via models in Waterfall, or we iterate and learn in working software via code. Now, given those two choices, which one's better? It kind of depends, because there's one more factor I said that we really need to consider before we decide which one of these two are better in a straight up fight, right? Because I think the only real difference, spending years watching both of these things being implemented, is where are you choosing to iterate and design and code? And that third thing that we need to consider is who's actually doing this work. What are the skills involved? Because I don't think skill distribution is quite what most people think it is. I think a lot of people think skill distribution really doesn't matter because most people are okay. In fact, if you think about the perceived skill distribution, it looks something like this. There are some people, and most people think they're okay. I do okay at whatever skill I'm trying to do, whether it's iterating in code with working software via code or iterating in requirements design via models. I think I'm okay. And if we had to put some numbers on here, we might say that about 70% think they're okay. Some people are scary. Not scary as in they're bad people, but scary as they think they're okay because, I've got this job title and I do the practices and I think I'm doing fine, but really what they're doing is scary, that they're not actually executing the practices. My coworker, Steve Talkie, likes to talk about net negative producing programmers. They're actually doing harm rather than good. I think the scary people are often doing harm rather than the good. They're causing more chaos than they are delivering value sometimes. So I think there's a reasonable chunk, 15% that are scary. And there's 15% that are awesome. These people are amazing. You could put them in any kind of practice and it would be great because they're awesome. Right? They're just able to do it. In fact, if you think about where methodologists come from, the people who wrote things like the initial agile methods or the waterfall and trying to improve the waterfall methods, they tend to be way over there on the awesome side of the scale, which means they think that it just works. In fact, the interesting thing is both the scary people and the awesome people don't think they should change anything. Scary people just don't know enough to change, and they think, oh, this is the way I do it. We have to do it this way. And the awesome people think, I thought this through a lot, and I've done a lot of research. This is the only way that works. It's the okay people are going, well, I think I'm okay, but I'm really not sure. So I'm willing to learn and practice and try a few more things. They're kind of like the sweet spot of gaining kind of stuff. So methodologists don't want to change much. Scary people don't want to change much, but most people are okay, so we're all right. That's 70% of most people are okay. Unfortunately, that's not how skills are actually distributed in real life. Lots of different areas that I've read, and perhaps you've read similar things yourself, said the actual distribution of skills looks something more like this. Most of us are scary. That is, we think we know what we're doing. We're nice people. We get along with everyone really fine. And when we execute a practice, we think, hey, we're not that bad because we look around us and everyone else is kind of like we are. Right? If we had to put some numbers to this, we might say 75% of anyone in any kind of skill distribution are kind of scary. That is that they don't really know what they're doing very well. 20% might be okay. And these are the people that tend to be, standing out in your organization. It's like, whoa. But you also see that they're often, questioning themselves and trying to improve their skills a little bit. And 5% are the awesome. That they're just, no matter what you do, really has an impact. And so hopefully you're starting to see is like, whoa, wait a minute. What happens if I'm running Waterfall with scary? What happens if I'm running Agile with scary? Which is fairly likely, given that the vast majority of any skill distribution is the scary people. People, they think they know what they're doing. They may teach like people like me, and they might be the scary. You'll have to decide whether I'm one of the scary or not in this kind of endeavor, right? Because they think they know when they really don't. So let's then do this. Let's see the real decider here. Let's apply the skills versus the methods and see which one probably comes out on top. And it may not be for the reasons you're thinking. So let's take our skills and our methods and then see if we can make something a little bit interesting here. So here's my skill distribution, and I've got two different options, right? Should I iterate and learn in requirements and design, aka waterfall, right? That's what it really wants to do. It wants to iterate in requirements and design, spend the vast majority of my time in requirements and design, iterating there, interacting with the customer, getting that feedback, everyone being educated. Or do I want to iterate and learn in working software, right? This is where my Agile, also known as Agile, it says, hey, let's not worry about getting requirements design perfect. Let's get something out there, get some feedback, get going, okay? So these are my two choices. And I think, again, this is what truly differentiates what for, our methodologists is what waterfall should be versus what our methodologists say what Agile should be. Where are you going to iterate and learn? So let's take a look at our skill set here and let's say we have the awesome people, right? That 5% that are really, truly awesome. They're amazing. Well, if you truly have the awesome people, you can't go wrong, right? You're going to have a successful software project because you have awesome people. I mean, so you can just almost in a sense flip a coin here and say, let's do one or the other. We're going to have a great project. We're going to all enjoy ourselves. We're going to be happy with how it comes up because both of these were being executed by people who know how to make it work and do it well. But if you're going to ask me to choose between the two of these, I'm going to put my check mark on waterfall. Now, that may shock some of you, but I think I have a couple really good reasons why. My primary reasons is that I think it is way cheaper, more effective and efficient to iterate and learn in paper than on working software. I can do far more quicker revolutions of this. I can keep the cost down. I don't have to have a huge infrastructure. I don't have a huge team. I can do it with fewer people. I can iterate and learn more effectively and efficiently on paper than I can ever in working software. That is, if I have awesome people, I will argue clearly that my waterfall project will be faster and cheaper than your Agile project because I can do the iteration and learning far more effectively. Now, there's lots of other factors here that you might say, well, what if you don't have awesome? Well, we'll get into that. But we're just saying if I have the best of the people who can execute this skill, the waterfall method, I think, is going to be preferable over the iterative learning. In fact, I also think it's going to be more innovative. I suggested that earlier on. Why do I think it's going to be more innovative? I think it's going to be more innovative because it really focuses on understanding the problem. The issue with Agile is that we didn't do a lot of exploitation of the problem, and so we're not actually solving very well. So for me, innovation is really not about, did I apply technology in a cool new way? No. Innovation really happens when we understand that the problem that everyone else thinks they're solving is the wrong problem. Apple did this for years. Everyone came out with all the technology first, and Apple said, yeah, but you're not solving the right problem with that technology. The real problem is, and often it was a case of usability, not a case of actual doing the function, but making that function really usable and simple and understandable. That's what Apple did. It says, you solved the wrong problem. You solved just did the function execute. We're solving it. Yeah, we're executing the function, but we're doing it in a way that people actually want to use it. Innovation is, did you solve the problem that other people weren't seeing yet? And because you're spending time in requirements and design, you have a chance to really understand the problem and see that nuance that maybe all the other solutions out there are not solving the right problem. You could twist it a little bit and say, you know what, if we change this aspect of understanding this problem, we can bring technology to it and solve it in a way that no one else has done before. You don't get that often with Agile nearly as much because you're already locking yourself into a solution because no one's analyzing the problem. So I think given awesome people, I'm going to choose iterate and learn in requirements and design, waterfall over Agile. But this is only 5% of the population. So chances are I don't have awesome people. Let's go to the other end of the scale and say, let's say I have a normal team, right? This is my average team out there today. And so I'm full of scary people who think that they know what they're doing, but really don't. They're great people as otherwise, but they just don't know the practices, don't know the theory underneath things, don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it because someone told them this is how you're supposed to do it, right? We read a book once, we took a 2-day seminar, and boom, we were doing this thing. And they really have no clue about why it's doing what it is. Well, a couple things. First of all, you can probably kiss away iterate and learn, right? Neither of these two teams are going to be doing iterating and learn because they don't know. They're just trying to execute. They're just trying to get through the day and go home. So I don't see on either teams, when I see kind of normal development, lots of iteration and learning. And I hear about it. They use different ways to talk about it. On my waterfall projects, they'll talk about, oh, we got to focus on creating some deliverables, especially for some stage gate process. We got to get to this stage. All these deliverables have to be signed off by this point. And then they go into massive change control, which makes changing anything such a pain that we really don't want to change anything because we try to freeze it from what it was. And you're really not learning anymore, right? You're not having that interaction, that free flow of ideas that Waterfall was designed to have up front. And on the Agile side, I hear a slightly different words, but it's a similar story. We're spending all our time working on enablers. We need to build all this infrastructure first before we get anywhere. And then we've gone 3, 6, 9 months without doing a darn thing. I was just recently on an Agile project that had spent 9 months and delivered no value whatsoever that any customer could play with, or even in a lab environment. They couldn't come in and play with it. There's no feedback of the stakeholders going on. Yeah, maybe some iteration for the designers and developers, but nothing for the stakeholders to understand, did we actually describe the problem correctly? And even worse to me is that often we hear people talking about, we're going to organize by features. We're going to build features. No feature delivers value. It's only a string of features. I need like 7 features to scratch my nose. One feature doesn't often deliver enough value that I can show it to a customer and start getting iterating and learning among the stakeholders, which often is as important or more important than iteration and learning among the developers about how the design is going to work. And so, frankly, when I have a typical team, right, 75% of the people out there are scary in the sense of they don't understand. I see these two as functionally equivalent. That it doesn't really matter whether you call it waterfall or agile. You're doing the same development practice at all. You're getting sketchy requirements together. You're tossing them into a design process, which is sort of, maybe it sounds formal, but basically you're learning as you go. And hopefully something develops out the backside. And then you say, Earl, how do you scale this? I'm like, ooh, don't come to me with that question. That just scares the heck out of me. And so given these two, though, I have to, if you make me choose, say, which one am I going to choose between the two? Should I do waterfall or agile when I have a typical project? Here's where I think I'll give a really weak checkpoint to agile. And I'll give this weak checkpoint to agile because it gives me the potential to actually discover faster that I'm in trouble and maybe do something about it. But it's just the potential. A lot of my organizations don't take advantage of that. They don't see that by these frequent releases, I might be able to learn that this isn't going so well because I'm never releasing. I'm doing all those enablers and I'm building this feature that's going to take 17 sprints to finish before we can show it to anyone. Nuts, right? You're not running this well, but I'm going to give it to you because it gives me the potential tool to see. But I'm not excited because, again, I think roughly in real life, they're functionally equivalent. They're doing roughly the same thing. So what if I have okay people? Okay people, they actually have a little bit of skill here. They're not awesome, right? They don't write them, but they understand it. They got the why figured out. They've got they're good enough to know that they don't know everything, and so they're cautious and they try more. They're okay. Well, I'd be relatively happy with them in either of these two locations to a certain degree. I think waterfall might work with them. And I think iterate and learn would work for them. But I'm actually going to give my check mark to iterate and learn in this one. And I'm going to do that because I think that the cycles here are much, much faster. That is, because these people are willing to learn and improve, I have to make these shorter cycles that I typically see in my agile projects being weeks rather than months or quarters or something like that will give me a chance to learn. And finally, also, I think because it's faster to learn, as an educator and consultant, I think this is easier to teach. Modeling is really kind of hard to teach in many ways because you have to jump multiple levels of abstraction and really compartmentalize. It's a lot of mental work, where the iterate and learn in Agile is much more just coding, right? Creating code, which is something we're going to do either way. And so I think it's a little bit easier to teach. I can get through the cycles faster on an Agile project to help my okay people actually take advantage of that method than I can often on the waterfall. So it's going to get my check mark here. It gets my check mark for ready to iterate and learn. what if I have a mixed bag, right? I might have some awesome people, I have some okay people, and I have the bulk of them being scary people. Well, one of my things here is that play to your strengths, right? If my awesome people are awesome modelers, I'm going to do a waterfall project. I want to put the awesome people and take advantage of them really, really quickly. And so I would give that to the waterfall side, iterate and learn in requirements and design. If my awesome people are developers, right? They're really good coders, excellent technical people. I might go with my strengths and go with the iterate and learn. If I'm really not sure where my awesome people are, but I'm pretty sure I've got some and some okay people, I'm going to give my check mark this time again to Agile. And I'm going to give it to Agile for a couple reasons. One, the primary one is I think it's easier to figure out because of these short cycles again, it's easier to find out who are the pretenders and who are the performers, right? Figure out who are my scary people because I think in Agile, there's less places to hide. One of the issues we always had in Waterfall is it's easy to be a pretender in Waterfall. Oh yeah, I'm a great modeler. I'm an awesome modeler. And all the models come out and they look pretty. There's lots of lines and stuff like that, but they never went to the iterative practices. They never found rules that challenge. They never did anything besides just record. They didn't think through things. They weren't really awesome. They were not even that good, but they're pretenders. And it was easy to do that because they wouldn't actually suffer any consequences from their pretending for months and months and months, potentially. Where in Agile, I can find that out a lot sooner. It's easier for me to figure out who the pretenders are and who are the performers. That's my primary reason. I can find out who is the ones that are doing this much more quickly. But there's also another reason I kind of lean Agile this way with a relatively solid check mark. If you look at the practitioners in millions, and these numbers are hard to read, but don't worry about it, it goes up to 30 million on the top. If we look at the number of people who are sort of recorded as software development, that number is right around 27 million worldwide, or roughly about 5 million US-ish. Right, but 27 worldwide. I think these people are developers. It's a relatively large people who say, yeah, I do development. But if you say, what is the population of people who do modeling? I think it's really, really small. In fact, I think I'm being generous if I say it's about 10% of the people who say they're developers. Now, it should be that all developers are modelers, but most developers don't actually model that much. They're not good modelers. And they may be scary modelers, but they're not in the okay and the awesome camp. And so if you look at people who say, I practice this, I want to do it over and over again, this is what I do for a living, I don't think there's a very large population. I'm only going to give that 10% right now of the developers. So if I'm looking for my awesome quotient, right, that awesome quotient is about 5%, I said, I've got a much larger pool of potential awesome developers than I do as a pool of awesome modelers. That's just numbers here. Right? And my chance of having an awesome modeler on my team is way, way, way smaller than my chance of having an awesome developer. And my ability to hire an awesome developer is probably much, much higher than my ability to hire an awesome modeler. So that's why I'm giving my check mark when I have a mixed bag, because probably my strengths are going to be more closer to the development side than the modeling side. All right. So I've just put a fire hose on you about why I think it is. What I'm arguing here is we look at my scorecard, what really difference is where you're going to iterate and learn. Are you going to iterate and learn in requirements and design, or are you going to iterate and learn in working software? That seems to be the core difference. And depending on your skill level, I have different answers, right? If you have the awesome people, I said, I want to iterate and learn in requirements and design. I'll probably choose a more waterfall approach because that's where my awesome is. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's more efficient than if I have to go iterate through work and learn through working software. But if I have a typical development team, which most people are scary, that is, they really don't understand why, they've just been told to do it and they do it, right? I think you're equally messed up. And I gave a weak check mark to Agile just because it gives me the chance to see, but again, I think you're hosed either way. It's going to be a long, scary, difficult project. I think they're functionally equivalent, so I gave it a weak check mark. If I have okay people who are willing to learn, I gave a solid check mark to Agile because the shorter cycles give me an ability to help them learn. And it's easier to teach that kind of thing. And finally, when I have a mixed bag, just the numbers game alone says, I probably should lean toward Agile because chances are, just given numbers, if I do have some awesome people, they're more likely to be awesome developers. And the short cycles, again, give me a chance more quickly to see the pretenders from the performers. So overall, Agile seems to win as a go-to method if you just said, what should you be doing today? Of course, it's going to depend. Where is your skills? Are you have awesome people? Are you willing to learn to model? Because that's going to be more effective and efficient potentially than the Agile approach. But if you have a normal development team and you use the tools, Agile could actually help you improve probably a little bit faster than if you did a waterfall method. But either way, hopefully one of the things you're hopefully taking away from this is that you need to grow your skills, right? Chances are you have a team full of relatively scary people who think they know what they're doing, but haven't got a clue why they're doing it that way, except they've been told, and that's how they were taught to do it. They haven't really analyzed and thought deeply about it because either they don't care or they've never had time or the inclination or someone to step in and do it. And frankly, giving them a plural site license and say, go learn something, ain't going to change it, right? There's too many deadlines to hit overall. So that's not going to be a very good approach as well. So you're going to have to think about how to do this. Now, one of the things that we did here at Construx for a long time, and we've helped other companies do, is create a professional development ladder. And each stage, you have multiple stages you go through, and each stage says, what experience do you need to have? Right? What did you have to do on a project? And what knowledge did you need to gain at the same time? So it wasn't just book learning, go take a class, but take a class and then show us how you applied that. Explain it. All this under the insight of some mentor of some kind who's been there, done that, understands the why, and helps them grow. I mean, that's a really formal way to grow your skills, and you can do that kind of stuff. Or you can just have lots of practice, keep people steady, but decide in which way you want to go. But it's up to the leaders in this conversation to start saying, hey, I probably have a bunch of scary people because that's just the way it works. I try to hire the best, but the population is 75% scary, only 20% okay, and only 5% awesome. So given those kind of numbers, my chance of getting scary people, I have to have in place, if I want to have good development on my projects, whether I'm doing waterfall or agile, I need to have people that I can grow. And I need to take those scary people, I need to give them the feedback. By the way, that's a way to get people out of the scary into the okay, is you have to give them feedback on how they're actually doing, not what they perceive they're doing, not what, everyone gets a reward kind of thing, but clear feedback against the standard about how they're performing. And that's what those kind of knowledge ladders really do. If you said, Earl, design me a method overall that I would do, because again, I was once a methodologist, I would probably lean to something like this, what I call better agile. Better agile says, you know what? I'm going to take my product owner, the person who's in charge of the backlog, and I'm going to actually make them work their butt off. I'm going to have them iterate and learn in requirements. That is that they're going to go out and they're going to be constantly meeting the stakeholders. They're going to be doing those 5 kinds of modeling so that they can truly understand the problem well enough to start saying, hey, I know where the value is. I know how I can help the team innovate on this because we have a clear understanding of what the problem really is, not the solution that the stakeholders showed up with, but what was underlying their need for that solution so that we can solve for that need, not their necessarily the want or the ask that they initially had. I'm going to do that hard work. And then I can start feeding the team in value increments, right? Not in features, but in value increments, what I like to call value paths, value increments into the developing community where they can iterate and learn in working software. I don't think there's a harm in that. It's going to make my project potentially a little bit longer. But again, given a chaotic environment and given my skill set, this is where a lot of people can learn and go forward. And I can have a smaller set of people who are my product owners who really good jobs. So if you just look at the numbers game here, that might work out well. And I get the best of both learning environments to try to come up with the best possible software overall. So that's my argument. What's different is where we iterate and learn, and potentially we could have a better agile overall. And with that, I'm open for questions and answers. Mark, you're muted. You're physically muted in Teams. We couldn't have had a webinar without someone saying that.
Absolutely. I was just going to go get a towel after the fire hose, but that was actually, you could tell your energy is high on that, sir. You really were interested in trying to put some messages out there, and we appreciate that. I have a first question that actually came in before you even started, and I think
Whoa.
you perhaps already I think you already hit this, but I'll bring it out there as well. Agile within a waterfall process, like in medical devices where QMS systems are used with phase gates, things like that. How common or uncommon in your experience is it to do agile within waterfall like that?
Well, I find it attempted a lot. A lot of people are attempting it. But again, if you look at the skill distribution argument I'm making, it's most people are scary. It's not working out as well as they like. What they tend to fall back on is short increment waterfall. I was just with a medical device company a year or so ago, and that's the company that went 9 months without producing anything of value that they could give to stakeholders to get the feedback loop going. But they also they were doing agile, right? They had all these named roles like product owners and scrum masters and stuff. What I have seen one instance in a team where they were actually doing it well, and so they were working with software and they were using things like breadboards and simulators and even stubbing out the hardware when the hardware wasn't there, so that the customer who typically interacted with the software portion of it could actually give them feedback about, hey, I could do my job or not with this. So I have seen that work, but it takes someone at least the okay or the awesome category to really pull that one off. And we also then have to re-educate the business a little bit and get them off their stage gate model, because they've got stuck on a waterfall stage gate model, which thinks, oh, I need this deliverable completely done at this gate. And they misunderstood the regulatory environment. I think I will argue with them that they misunderstood regulatory did that, but you don't need it done. You need it done for an increment of shippable deliverable. You don't need it done to do work anywhere else, right? All regulators care about what you go to market with, not what you did along the way for the most part.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, Greg has a question for you. If your goal is to produce estimates at the start of your project, then regardless of skill distribution, what is recommended for methodology? My impression is that in order to produce useful estimates, one must have collected and analyzed requirements and and solidified models and designs to some extent.
So I was just with a company doing estimation classes. One of the classes I teach is estimation. And one of the things that we uh, discover typically is that when people think of estimation, they're not, again, they're scary. They're in the scary part of the curve. They think, oh, I need to have detailed plans, which I add them all up together, and then I come up with an estimate that has a plus or minus 10%. And what we learn is that estimation is the ongoing process. You start estimating not with all this detail, not with the requirements design even known yet, but you can do an analogy estimate or you can do a structure group estimate that has a relatively wide amount of uncertainty. You say, well, what good is that? Well, you say, well, it still gives you a planning number and it tells you it's not going to exceed number and it's going to be at least number. And that's good for good early decisions, whether go, no go. Yes, by the time you want to make a true commitment, you need to know the requirements to a certain degree and the design to a certain degree. But you don't need to know all the requirements. You don't need to know all the design, because we can use proxies and other things. And so usually what we see here when we have that kind of question is not how do you do it without knowing it. It's, oh, what technique works well? What level of uncertainty do I have? And how do I help the business make the decisions it needs to make at that point, using estimation as information as opposed to some sort of magical future telling device.
Okay. Well, I got a lot of questions coming in, so I'll try and keep with them here.
Sure.
So same as Greg's point, after numerous failures with launching new products using an agile approach with poor requirements up front, we built the wrong product. We're now working on
Yeah.
a new product focusing on much more detailed requirements and defined architecture up front, which we are signing off whilst getting going with an agile process to build the software. Is that a standard
Yeah.
approach?
That's a reasonable approach, right? We saw that that was kind of like my fourth agile, fourth waterfall model, right? We did a relatively decent amount of requirements and design up front, and then go in incremental development cycles to get the feedback. In fact, my better agile gets pretty close to that. Now, the trick is that you'll have to make sure that your people doing requirements and design are not scary, right? Have you got some sort of person that you trust, someone that can come in and say, okay, yeah, these look reasonable. These look pretty good. They're doing a good job. Or, whoa, you're in trouble because, yeah, they said they did requirements, but what all I see is some natural language text on page after page, which is typically a sign that your requirements are going to get you in trouble.
Okay, that's a good answer. Here's a kind of a tools related question, I think. Um, how do the extent of use of CI/CD pipelines with code analysis, automated test suite execution, SonarQube, SonarLint Parasoft, JTest, et cetera, play into the decision of which approach is best?
Not a ton, actually, because all those tools you talked about are great to say, is your code reasonable code, maintainable code, executionable code? And if you've got a reasonable set of normal tests, that what we see from even scary people, it's code that passes the happy path. What you may not have had is any test because you don't have good testers. You have scary testers that only know how to test a happy path. They haven't found all the boundary conditions. They don't have enough staffing because they don't know the problem. They don't know where the boundaries are because no one's described the real problem to them. And so you don't have those ends of that test suite. Those save labor. Those are labor saving devices for the developer. So it allows you potentially on the development side to circle through the development cycles more quickly, which I probably maybe leans me a little bit to agile, but at the same time doesn't solve the fundamental problem. Are we building the right thing? As that earlier questioner answers, like we did a great job on agile and we built the wrong product.
Right. So certainly, a lot of your presentation today boils down to it's the people, stupid. Um, so did you ever test your team to understand their strengths and weaknesses? Is that something that you would consider doing when you're starting to perhaps think about binning, and where does your team fit in terms of that distribution of scary versus awesome?
Well, I think if you want to play it safe, you walk in with the expectation that the majority of your team is kind of scary. Um, our coworker Steve Talkie loves to say that we're mostly a organization of overpaid amateurs, right?
Highly paid amateurs.
Highly paid amateurs. So that's my idea of being scary here. We think we know what we're doing, we're not. So let's just go with that assumption. So you should have some checks and balances along the way to say, are these critical things that our method that we chose, whether it's the waterfall method or a more agile method, these critical things, are we actually executing those in a reasonable way from a third party source of your choosing? That will come in and say, yeah, that looks right, or whoa, yeah, these are scary. Here's what you need to remediate that because if you keep on this path, it's not going to give you the outcomes you're hoping for.
All right, let's see. Um, what research is the actual skill distribution, the 75% scary thing, based on? And I would say corollary to that is the practitioner data as well. You've sorted practitioner data.
Yeah, so my numbers are, I'll admit, my numbers are placeholder numbers. I don't know whether it's 75, 70, 60. But what it's based on is several books that I've read, and I wish I could quote them to you, but Malcolm Gladwell popularized this stuff too in one of his books. Which one was it? Oh, well, I'll remember it someday. But I've seen this thing several times. And if you think, hey, that's not the right skill distribution, it's more like a bell curve, then you can just toss what I said out the window. Thank you for 45 minutes of your time today.
So,
But no,
so
so I've
yeah,
seen it from several sources. I don't have those references. I think if you Google it, you probably will find similar results.
yeah. And a follow up to that question, a commenter says, I'm similarly curious about the data origin. I sense many organizations might or maybe fall into a self delusional denial, re the competence of the distribution of their population. Is there some research you can point to, or how might one
Yeah.
ascertain what the distribution actually really is?
Yeah, I've like I said, I've read that before. I think you can now Google foo as well as I can about finding some sources and maybe some better numbers. It's amazing the number of companies I go that say we hire from the top 10%. And I'm like, everyone's hiring for the top 10%. That 10% has gone down to 80% of all the companies. How the hell did that happen? Right? No, they're hiring from the pool that they have available to them. They may be taking the top of their pool, but that doesn't mean they're getting out of where I think the vast majority of people really are.
Right. Well, I think our founder Steve McConnell gave a webinar years ago called "The Secrets of World Class Software Organizations," and one of his takeaways was, from a hiring perspective, you absolutely have to find the best possible people you can find. And that
Yeah.
certainly correlates to what you're saying, whether it's data driven or not. But I do recall that conversation. So a
Yeah.
couple more questions. What about safe? You kind of like hinted at it through the thing on the table. Is that more like waterfall or more like agile, or is bad safe like waterfall and good safe more like agile, or something like that?
Yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with SAFe, right? I think that does it it I think its strength is at the top of its model where it tries to say businesses you have capacity for 5 projects, don't try to start 40. Where businesses will typically try to start 40 projects because there's 40 promises to be kept. So I always have an issue with that. But I think, giving Dean Leffingwell his credit, he was a great project manager. That's where his strengths lie. So you'll see a lot of project management stuff. I think that SAFe does play agile buzzword. So, but I think it's more sequential, more waterfallish than it is typically agile. I think it's trying to get back to that better design of waterfall, right, where it can be very effective and very useful. I think if you actually understood the underpinnings of SAFe, it can be a very helpful tool to help you think through your process. But again, I think what's happening is SAFe is getting applied to many organizations that have a lot of people in the scary territory, and it's not working out for them.
Right. Here's a good one. Steve asks, what are advantages between agile waterfall approaches with non-co-located virtual teams? Is there any strength in one way or the other?
Right. So one of this, I think Agile will actually work a little bit better with non-co-located teams for the most part, because a lot of the interaction in waterfall and modeling really does need some face-to-face time. Whereas working software, people can try to execute that asynchronously, whereas the modeling really needs to happen in a more synchronous kind of fashion. So if you have a distributed team, Agile is probably going to work a little bit better for the stakeholder learning. And you can find we've got enough tools and stuff, hopefully, in these communication patterns like we're using today to help some of the developer interaction and feedback loops well. So, given a distributed team, I probably would lean a little bit more agile.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I got one more question for you. Does the overall size of the development organization have any impact on your conclusions?
So it really is the size of the work that's working together. Um,
Hmm.
this is more important than the size of the organization overall. So I can have a huge organization. I got one team that has full of awesome people, and they'll just make great software, and then the other rest are scary. The organization really has an impact on that cultural stuff, all that stuff that I call BS at the beginning, right? It's like how do we empower teams? That's what the organization controls, and that's a lot harder to do the bigger you get, it seems. As small organizations where everyone knows everyone else, the empowerment sort of happens for the most part if they have any kind of trust in each other. Once you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you start getting middle managers who want to build kingdoms, and all of a sudden a lot of that, and they get, not that they want to build kingdoms, let's give them more of that. They've been given charters to deliver certain things by their bosses, and to deliver those charters is sometimes at odds with what the projects want to do. So it's kind of difficult to deal with that. So the organization has more impact on the cultural side than on the staffing side, typically. Though you
All
might have
right,
more choices to find more awesome people.
that's true. That's very true. So we were a couple of minutes before the top of the hour. I am looking through the chats. I have questions coming in through the chat and questions coming in through Q&A. So I'm going back and forth to see where some of them.
Well, we can tell the majority that they can go, and then if you, Mark, you willing to hang out for a few extra minutes and
Sure,
answer some questions?
absolutely,
Sure,
absolutely.
we'll hang out
Not
for a
not a,
few.
not a problem. So yeah. So anyway, just to let everyone know, thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. I think people really had some good questions. I think a lot of people were leaning in. I don't know if you can tell that virtually, but I can sense it that people are very interested in what you had to say. You certainly are an energetic presenter. We really appreciate your energy and bringing this information to us today. Thank everyone for joining us. And if you want to hang out to us, we're going to hang out in the chat for a while and be a little more informal. We're welcome to continue to answer questions. If you do think about something, you do have to drop off. Send us a note at comments@construx.com and with
Or
regards to
hello.
this, or hello@construx.com, either one. Both of them work, and we'll address them after the fact. And in the shameless self-promotion category, if you wanted to talk to Earl particularly about something in your organization, we're happy to do that as well. So reach out to us in either of those channels for that purpose too. All right.
All right. So now we'll go to the more casual, empty white space version here, where I can take my pen and draw things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, looking for some other questions. There were a lot of people that had questions about stage gate kind of things, and in particular, the notion of documentation, right? I mean, I think
Right.
a lot of people, sort of apply this notion of heavyweight documentation to a classical waterfall approach. What about StageGate? Is it less reliant on that heavy distribution of documents, or is it really just a different way of presenting it?
So the problem with stage gates is stage gates were invented for a particular reason. Before we had gates, if we had the start of our project, right? Start to the end of our project, what would happen is we start it, they say, here's $2 million, here's $1 million, go off and build me something. And we do this entire process and no one have any idea what it was like until the end. And often it was not a pleasant surprise. So what we did is we created these gates along the way to start saying, what is the true status of our investment, right? We invested X amount of dollars up front, right? What is the status here? Is our investment still look sound? It was an investment decision. And the only things the gate was supposed to decide was, yes, keep going, right? This looks like a good investment. Stop. No, this investment has turned out to be crap. It looks like we're going to spend 2 million on a 500,000 return. Kill it now, or make a simple adjustment, right? Excuse me. And what did you need to make that go, stop, or adjust? You need the information about the true status of the project. Where was it at? What did it know? And so to get that status to a set of stakeholders, we needed to create some sort of visibility. And often the only visibility, especially early on, was visibility through documentation. Working software can actually do this a lot better. StageGate actually works better with working software from an agile process than it does with documentation from a waterfall process. But if you start seeing it as information to make a decision, then we don't care if the document is complete. We don't care if it's signed off. We don't care any of this stuff because that gives us actually a truer understanding of where the project's at. What is the true state right now so we can make this decision? But because we said, hey, give us this information in documents, people start confusing the stage gate with a document creation process. Our job at this gate is to create documents to get through the gate. Whether they contain the right content or not was hopeful. But we need to get through the gate to get to the next gate. And the gate became the important thing, not making the decision about go, no go, stop, based upon what's the status of our investment. So usually when I go in these organizations that have stage gate processes, I need to help them understand the purpose of your gate is to make decisions about the investment decision, not to say whether the project is right or the design is right or the requirements are right, but to say, does our investment still look sound or do we need to change the parameters of our investment? And you do that by understanding the true nature of where the project's at. And by the way, if you're doing Agile, here's another way I can lean toward Agile a bit. You can actually get a better picture. You can see, hey, this value's been delivered by this point. Here's our value delivery rate. Given the investment period, how much value are we likely to deliver? I can make a much more informed decision saying, well, look, we have some signed off documents. Whoa.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about the notion of documentation versus illustration, and what I mean by that is, demonstration of working software in an agile context, right? So people can see something and either give them a thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't like this, versus having to paw through documents to find out that no, you captured the wrong thing or captured what we were saying incorrectly, right? So it's almost
Or
like
even
a
know at the
yeah,
stakeholder level. How do they know?
right, right, exactly. I mean, it's almost a learning style kind of thing, right? There's some people who
Yeah.
actually learn by seeing, and maybe in some respects there might be a distribution you could have of people who are looking for validation in either of those approaches and might actually get it more easily by an illustration method as opposed to documentation. And then there's
Right.
some people who just like to read.
Yeah. But even the
So
readers, most of the people reading at that level who have to make the decision have no idea. I mean, they have a general idea of the problem, but they don't know enough details to say whether anything in there is actually right or wrong.
right,
They
right,
trust the people who signed off that the right or wrong decision was made.
absolutely. Makes sense. Anybody else with questions out there? I'm still monitoring. We still have almost 60% of the attendees still online, which means the people are still listening to you, Earl.
Well, that's kind of scary.
Imagine that. Imagine that.
Yeah. So now you got me curious. I'm gonna have to go back and reaffirm my distribution seal because I use this idea that skills are not distributed evenly all over the place. And so I've trusted my books, and I just adopted it. Maybe I need to have a clear reference somewhere.
Well, maybe what we do,
Yeah.
Earl, is, I'll give you an action item. It's sort of sad that you get the action item out of this, but maybe what we do is we can put a note when we post this up on the YouTube channel saying here's some, here's a reference to where some of this data came from.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Or not. Or not.
All right. Well, it looks like no more questions in the queue.
Yeah. Oh God, here's a half an hour answer. What's your take on the Agile Manifesto?
The Agile Manifesto. It's okay. I mean, there's two parts of the Agile Manifesto. There's the top part of the Agile Manifesto, which says, we like X over Y, right? And they juxtapose two things. And then there's 12 principles. The 12 principles, I'll give the 12 principles a decent check mark. There's a couple of them that I don't think have held up as well as possible, but generally they're not technique things, they're organizational cultural things. Business people and developers should work closely together. Yeah, we've known that for decades, right? This wasn't new to Agile. This is just saying your cultures need attention when you're developing software, because this is knowledge work. This isn't physical labor. This is knowledge work. This is getting stuff out of one brain into someone else's brain. That brain then puts it into a special language called code, and it pumps it out. But it's all about knowledge. It's about sharing information and knowledge. So yeah, people should work together. We should allow people actually to learn, right? So the principle, right? But the X over Y stuff, that's mostly garbage. That was a reaction at the time, because at that time, what you have to understand is the only answer that we had to why are software projects sucking so much was process, more process. And what the Agile people were saying, it's not a process problem. And that's what this top part was all about. It's not a process problem. It is a cultural problem. It is a feedback loop problem. Where are you going to iterate and learn? And you're obviously not doing it in requirements design like Waterfall said. So we're going to give you a method that's easier and more factual by iterating in working software. Right? Because you get that. Everyone wants to code. Every leader says, when are we going to start coding? Right? When am I going to see software come out? They're not, a lot of teams and organizations don't have the patience to wait to iterate and learn in requirements and design. So they say, let's get some software out there. And so this works better for you. So this part was just a reaction to the times. Those times aren't here anymore. You can ignore that part and really focus on the principles underneath. And that isn't too bad.
Right. Well, and again, back to my shameless self-promotion thing, the Construx Inspected That podcast actually did a podcast, number 29, if you want to go look it up in our resources on our webpage. Steve McConnell gave a presentation called 20 Years is Enough. It's time to update the Agile principles and values. And it was his take on the manifesto. So if you want another set of eyes and ears on that particular practice, you can go look at Steve's podcast and let us know what you think about that. All right, Earl, I think we're done. I think you killed it.
All right.
I really do appreciate your time. You not only your wisdom, but your sartorial splendor. I love the bow tie, and I really do appreciate the work that you did. Lots of thank yous coming in.
For a Wednesday. No tie on Wednesdays.
Yeah, what do you call that? You could call it the wide lapel, the disco look or something. But yeah, okay.
T-shirt Wednesdays or T-shirt Thursdays. Maybe we do T-shirt Thursdays.
All right, sounds great. Right. Thanks for participating, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, bye all.